Hello and welcome to the Larp Guide. In this video, I'm going to be talking about and giving some advice for costume creation for the upcoming Blood and Fire Larp event. This is the second part of my little mini-series covering the game. The next video will be covering the event preparation, so if that sounds interesting, and of course if you end up enjoying this video, then please consider becoming a subscriber to the channel. Okay, let's get into it. The first step when designing my Blood and Fire character costume was to read over the game brief and look at the period and location it will be set in. In the case with Blood and Fire, it is set within the 14th century and within Europe. This is very important, as this will have a massive impact on the costume that I design. There is no point in making a costume like Neo from the Matrix because it looks cool, when the game is set in a period in which that style of clothing just doesn't exist. When designing your costume for the event, it's important that you think about two factors: time and money. It's important to consider the balance between these two factors, as they will come up a lot during the design and the creation of your costume. The more money you can allocate to your costume, the less time that will be required to make it, and vice versa. Think of it like a scale. If you take from one side, it just ups the other. So, for example, making my own hat will save me having to buy one and reduce the cost, and the raw materials may be a lot cheaper. But then I must allocate the time to go and get all the materials and equipment needed to make the hat, and then of course make it. But no matter how your balance has been allocated, I always find that there are certain layers that can be used depending on your system and setting across multiple characters. These are things like shirts, trousers, and jackets. So I tend to have a load of these knocking around. These items tend to also be easy to purchase and normally very reasonably priced. And so I'd strongly recommend purchasing these instead of making them yourself. These items, I believe, make up your core LARP costume kit, and for me come under essential items, something that I'll be talking about in a future video. I ended up making some of my costume items and adapting others to better suit and fit my needs for the Blood and Fire LARP event. This was due to a custom order that didn't turn out and it didn't function the way I expected. I am planning on covering custom orders pitfalls in a later video, as the process and the end result was highly stressful, and I hope to prevent others going through what I did. The next step after allocating your time and budget is to get some inspiration. I personally go and have myself a Pinterest binge and get some ideas for what I want. I do it this way round, with the budget first and then go and look for inspiration, as I find that by having that kind of budget in my head when I'm looking at those costume ideas, I end up saving myself a lot of money. When I have a basic design and a head filled of ideas, I go digging in my LARP costume boxes for anything that I can use to match with those ideas. Or, in some cases, I go knock on a friend's doors and see if I can borrow some of their kit. Finally, I go online and see what I can get that looks similar from a reputable traders that I can find within my budget. I would personally recommend, due to past experience with these online stores, to use Chow's Emporium, Having the LARP Inn, Dark Blade, and LARP Fashion. But please look at the terms and conditions and reviews for whatever website store you choose to use. I can't stress enough how important it is that you especially look at the return policy. For example, the item you've received is too small. LARP can get cheaper over time, and you'll be amazed how quickly you can build up your LARP bits box of costume parts. And this box can save you loads of money over time. It's important to remember though, and something I feel that I should really bring up at this point, that as long as you're happy and you're within the game brief, your costume, no matter what, is amazing. Kit shaming is not tolerated within the LARP community, and if you are ever at the receiving end of this, please point that out to that person. Please do not compare yourself to others, but be inspired by them. But at the same time, don't feel any less about what you've created. I am not joking when I say my first LARP armor was made from painted baking trays that were then cable tied onto American shoulder pads that were covered in fur. Okay, back to it. If you have allocated more time over budget, then this is when you have to start thinking about what you can make yourself and what you need to buy from that online shopping basket. I have in the past made a full wasteland costume, cloaks, tabards, plate armor, chainmail, and various other items. It's amazing what you can do when you set your mind to it. There are also some fantastic guides online on how to make most things, and then it's just a matter of getting the parts and equipment needed and then allocating that time. In the case of my Blood and Fire costume, I did the following. I grabbed a pair of trousers, belt, and pouches from my LARP costume box. I purchased from an online store called Larp Fashion a LARP black robe. I then looked into fixing the custom order I had purchased. With all these items, I then spent some time with my wife and a pair of scissors, needle and thread, and went about turning a very stressful situation of my custom order into something that I feel would now fit within the system and, more importantly, is practical to use. For example, the seams are no longer coming apart under the weight of the costume. In the background, you can see me doing things like weathering the costume and creating some little details. Things like this add character and make your costume look lived in. You can, over time, build up by adding more layers, jewellery, damage, and all kinds of other little details that will help bring your character to life. You can also look into layers and signature items to help achieve this. But I'd recommend getting these as your character evolves over time, as they really start to ramp up the price and are often only usable for that character. For this character, I've spent some time ripping up and making the clothing look well worn, and then added some little extra details like lore scrolls, a seal kit, ink and quill, and various other little knickknacks. I have plans to add more to the costume in the future, but for now I feel it fits my needs. Strangely, I've always linked costume designing with miniature painting. What I mean with this is that I can paint a miniature with the base layers, but it's not until I start to add the details like the highlights and the lowlights, flesh tones, and a little scar that the miniature starts to look more realistic and alive. I think the same could be said about your costumes. You can get the base layers in front of you from making them or purchasing from a store, but it's not until you start to add those little details and accessories that it starts to look lived in and real. Okay, that covers my advice for costume design for Blood and Fire. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I love you all, and goodbye.